Mesdames et messieurs, chers actionnaires, bonjour à toutes et à tous. En raison des mesures sanitaires imposées dans le cadre de l'épidémie de Covid-19, au moment de la convocation de cette Assemblée générale, et en application des mesures d'urgence qui ont été adoptées par le gouvernement français, nous réunissons exceptionnellement l'Assemblée générale d'NJEPS à une date légèrement décalée et à huis clos. Cette assemblée se tient donc en dehors de la présence physique des actionnaires ou de tout autre participant, et ce, afin de préserver la santé et la sécurité de nos actionnaires et de nos salariés. Je remercie chaleureusement les actionnaires qui ont voté à distance pour cette Assemblée générale. Sont présents M. Carl Alberto Guglielminotti, directeur général de la société, M. Giuseppe Artizzu, Executive Director Global Energy Markets and Development, et Mme Francesca Sorgoni, secrétaire du conseil d'administration. Je vous propose de commencer immédiatement et je demande à Mme Francesca Sorgoni, de vous exposer les formalités légales d'ouverture de cette assemblée.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers actionnaires, bonjour. Je vais vous présenter les formalités légales de notre assemblée présidée par Carlalberto Guglielminotti, directeur général de la société. L'assemblée générale mixte a été convoquée ce jour, 1er juillet 2020, à huis clos, conformément à l'article 21 de nos statuts et en application de l'article 3 de l'ordonnance numéro 2020-318 et de l'article 4 de l'ordonnance numéro 2020-321, adoptée le 25 mars 2020. L'avis de réunion et de convocation ont été publiés au bulletin des annonces légales obligatoires le 27 mai 2020. L'avis de convocation a été publié au journal d'annonces légales du 12 juin 2020 et au bulletin des annonces légales obligatoires le 19 juin 2020. Les actionnaires nominatifs et les commissaires aux comptes ont été convoqués par lettre. S'agissant de la composition du bureau de votre assemblée, en accord avec les dispositions statutaires et légales précitées, les nombres de personnes appelées pour remplir les fonctions de scrutateurs sont affichés à l'écran. En accord avec les présidents et ses scrutateurs, j'assumerai les fonctions de secrétaire du bureau de l'Assemblée générale. Conformément à la loi, l'Assemblée générale mixte est régulièrement constituée lorsque les membres présents et représentés possèdent au moins, sur première convocation, les quart des actions ayant le droit de vote, soit 3 191 715 actions. Les actionnaires représentés ou ayant utilisé les votes par correspondance réunissent un nombre total d'actions avec droit de vote supérieur à ce nombre. Je vous invite à prendre connaissance du numéro du quorum définitif et du numéro des actions qui ont été votées. L'Assemblée générale mixte est donc régulièrement constituée et peut valablement se tenir. L'ordre du jour qui a été publié est affiché à l'écran. L'ensemble des documents requis par la réglementation en vigueur ont été déposés sur le bureau de l'Assemblée. En outre, tous les documents préalables ont été mis à la disposition des actionnaires dans les délais prescrits, en particulier au moyen du site internet de la société, dans la rubrique dédiée à la présente Assemblée générale. À la demande du président et avec l'accord du bureau de l'Assemblée, nous nous dispenserons de la lecture de l'ensemble des rapports préparés en vue de l'Assemblée et qui ont été mis à votre disposition. Aucun actionnaire n'a fait usage de son droit concernant l'inscription éventuelle des points additionnels à l'ordre du jour ou des projets de résolution. Je vous remercie de votre attention et je passe maintenant la parole à M. Guglielminotti, directeur général de la société, qui vous présentera l'agenda de cette journée.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers actionnaires, bonjour et bienvenue à l'Assemblée générale 2020 d'NJEPS. Je vous propose de vous donner lecture de l'agenda de la réunion. Notre assemblée débutera par la présentation des résultats financiers de l'année 2019, pour passer ensuite à la présentation de l'évolution du marché d'NJEPS. Après cela, une vidéo vous montrera les principales étapes et résultats atteints en 2019 et début 2020. Et M. Giuseppe Artizzu, Executive Director Global Energy Markets and Development et membre du conseil d'administration, vous présentera l'empreinte industrielle de la société et ses derniers développements. Je vous présenterai ensuite les conséquences liées à l'épidémie de Covid-2019 et je vous donnerai une perspective de l'année 2020. Nous passerons ensuite à la nouvelle composition du conseil d'administration à l'issue de cette assemblée générale, à l'exposé des travaux des différents comités en 2019 et je vous présenterai les nouveaux commissaires aux comptes de la société. Puis, je vous expliquerai la relation qu'NGPS a avec ses investisseurs pour conclure avec la politique de rémunération. Toutes ces actions seront présentées en langue anglaise. Une transcription de la présentation sera disponible dans les prochains jours dans le site internet de la société, dans la rubrique dédiée à la présente assemblée générale. Je vous inviterai par la suite à prendre connaissance du résumé des rapports des commissaires aux comptes via une intervention de nos commissaires aux comptes par vidéo. Nous procéderons à la séance de questions et réponses. Et enfin, nous vous communiquerons les résultats de vote des résolutions avant de clôturer cette assemblée générale. Je vous propose maintenant de passer à la présentation des résultats 2019. You will remember that with the refocusing and selectiveness approach outlined in the long-term strategic plan announced in June last year, we expected an outline of slower growth during the transition. Well, this had the short-term consequence of a backlog reduction and the postponement of our 2020 guidance to 2022, as you will remember, with the new 40 million guidance set for 2020. In line with that, 2019 has confirmed our growth pattern with a 29% growth to 20 million, in line with the new strategic path. Indeed, those are early results under the long-term strategic plan for our Giga Storage product line, with utility-scale storage and solar plus storage products, and the industrial solution product line, with microgrids and industrial storage system. On the other hand, I would say that we successfully deployed, thanks to the partnership with ENGIE, the Sol de Insurgentes project in Mexico, and the commissioning of an iconic, even if limited in size, microgrid in New Caledonia. In addition, we progressed to the construction of the project in Comoros and the storage solution for the LME power plant of ENGIE, while we successfully commissioned third stage of our microgrid in Somaliland. Our margins are slightly lower, yes, but mainly to the increase in the size of the project, like the solar plus storage project in Mexico, as you can imagine. And we expect this trend of margin compression to naturally continue under our long-term strategic plan, because for the simple reason, which is the scale of our projects we focus on. So it's a natural evolution towards larger and larger projects. EBITDA and net income do not really outline a poor performance from my perspective, but a physiological aspect. We are ready in terms of structure, people, and industrial premises to address projects for hundreds of megawatts, but such projects are not yet in our P&L. It's very simple. We just need one more step in terms of scale in order to invert the curve and start generating cash. This inversion of the curve is in front of our eyes, as it is true that our backlog has been reduced. This reflects the temporary reduction in order intake due to the fact that several significant projects have been either delayed or not awarded by ENGIE or did not materialize in the preceding month because of integration aspects or complexities within the ENGIE group. But we all know that with the one tender officially awarded and not just declared successful bid, our backlog would have been tripled, okay? So this is the reason why I would not focus on backlog reduction while analyzing our 2019 performance, simply because it's a matter of criteria that we use in terms of backlog recognition. Particularly in a moment in which we want to be strict more than ever in this specific situation on recognition of our backlog and our KPIs generally. But actually, the most important evidence of this inversion of the curve towards a profitable cash generation, let's say our future generally, is written in one single and clear KPI, which is the pipeline of projects that we have, which clearly represent the solidity of our fundamentals and, more importantly, the direction towards the achievement of our strategic plan. In less than 1 year, the evidence of the solidity and more importantly of the potential of our long-term strategic plan and our partnership of Engie with Engie clearly materialized. I mean, we more than doubled our pipeline compared to last year, while increasing our human resources in a negligible way, and this is the first evidence of the scalability of our business model. More importantly, with a solidity of that pipeline that we cannot even compare to 2018, as we are not talking anymore of a pipeline composed of several projects in complex emerging countries with related risks and uncertainties. I mean, we're talking about a large tenders in tier 1 storage markets like US, Middle East, gigawatt of projects, hundreds of millions of projects. So it's a totally different picture, which is a totally different picture, which is a test of the firepower we now have thanks to the Engie Group, where our unique know-how and technology can play another championship and get scaled very rapidly. Pipeline is then the one number we need to focus on to have a clear visibility on our growth trajectory towards our long-term strategic plan and our ambition to make 100 million revenues in 2022. And now we have, let me say, visibility thanks to the tender won in our pipeline on the strong majority of such figures and 400 million revenues in 2025, which is, yes, an indicative management ambition, but today sounds to me more solid than ever, let me say. We clearly see how can we match such target. I mean, 90% of such pipeline is made by Giga Storage projects, while industrial solution and even more importantly, e-mobility are, yes, underrepresented in our pipeline, but represents today not a disappointment, but rather a huge upside for our strategic plan. At page 13, we have a transparent representation of where we are. 100 million of tenders already won, 200 million we still are shortlisted. Again, those are not revenues in our 2019 accounts, nor will be in our 2020 P&L, but it clearly sets a trajectory towards our targets. I would call it a step change in terms of maturity and scale at the same time. Finally, we get to the backlog, which is the figure which is mostly disappointing, as I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, we could not account for some projects that we expected to be in to move from the pipeline into the backlog, and did not take place, unfortunately. So you can see that, again, we provide the breakdown into Giga Storage, Industrial Solution, and the mobility. We just represented the net financial position. As you can see, at the end of the year, we had minus 8 million negative because we drawn down the Société Générale facility, which has resulted into a negative financial position. In terms of CapEx, as you can see, and as expected, let me say, the vast majority is related to R&D investment. Here again, the novelty in terms of is in terms of breakdown. I mean, we showed clearly the breakdown of the CapEx for R&D investment by families of products. So the control, the store, the move, and then finally the convert and connect. The most prominent is the control, obviously. Under the control family, we have the Profit EMS, the energy management system, for which we invested a lot last year. And then the second item would be the KWise, which is a platform to remotely control and manage the plants. Both of them, let me say, will be crucial in large tenders like Guam and Hawaii, obviously. So let's go straight into the meat of the figures, where we present the breakdown of the revenues for 2019. As you can see, the revenues were just above 20 million, 30% approximately increase from the previous year. You see that this figure was prominently dominated by our first iconic solar plus storage project in Sol de Insurgentes in Mexico, which represents a very important step towards the new strategic focus we announced last year. You can also see that we presented the breakdown in terms of the three product lines that we have previously highlighted and recently renamed into Giga Storage, Industrial Solution, and e-mobility. You can see once again, both in terms of geography and in terms of sector, of course, the sold-in rentals is very prominent in the revenues of 2019. We present, as we typically do, our personal cost. This is the single largest P&L item and the single largest cost item in general for the company. Therefore, we always provide, and we will continue to provide details, as you can see in this slide, especially important if you look at the amount of personal cost that we account for as a capex. And as you will see, that we keep a constant eye on the ratio of the personal cost in terms of what is capitalized vis-a-vis, for example, other criteria. The workforce has increased in line with our projections and with our plans. We plan to hire more as we prepare, as we are setting up the platform to address larger and larger projects. So industrially speaking, we are there, and that's reflected into the numbers. And one thing I'd like to show here is the fact that 30% of our employees, even if we grow, continue to be highly skilled employees with PhDs and MBAs. I mean, as the quality of our teams is and will continue to be our most important assets. We clearly see in these slides, more than 110 employees, 15 nationalities, 36 average age, stands for 10 years experience in the sector. Extremely rare competencies, as you can imagine. Almost all of them engineers or with a university degree, and as said, 30% with a PhD or an MBA. I cannot hide my pride in showing you such figures, as they represent why we passed in 5 years from less than 1 million revenue to winning tenders for more than 100 millions and 500 megawatt hours. A last word on compensation. 47,000 euros gross compensation on average, including also general and top management. In any other tech company outside Italy, a team with such skills, know-how, competencies, and degrees will cost from 30 to 50% more in the best case scenario. This is the reason why growth, retention, and engagement of our teams is of essence. In this context, we launched during the lockdown our family working program I will describe in a while, as ignoring the balance of such rare and precious resources would be blind from a managerial perspective, as you can imagine. The operating expenses are in line with what we had projected, amounted to 2.3 million, which the prominently figure, the circle in the middle, we have to spend a fair amount of money on external advisor. This is mainly in order to not to have too high G&A, and let's say directly in our books. But there is also another reading of this figure. If we had integrated more intensively in the NG group, we would have certainly had the opportunity to reduce the expanding and external advisor. However, we would have put at stake potentially the agility of our organization. Then this has been more a deliberate choice more than a lack of optimization of our operating expenses. And then the rest is fairly standard for facilities and corporate operations. Non-recurring expenses, of course, always something to be avoided as much as possible, but unfortunately, we did have to account for 1.6 million of non-expected expenses during the year 2019. We have divided 1.6 million into, let's say, standard non-recurring expenses, roughly 1/3 of them, and 2/3, the remaining 2/3, is what we call transition cost. By transition cost, we mean items which either we had to incur in transitioning into the refocusing strategy, or that we would have not incurred thanks to the new refocus strategy. Again, very important aspect to highlight for 2019 is that we proceeded with the shutting down of non-core activities. This had a relatively high price tag of 3.5 million in total. And we decided to provide a detailed breakdown of with item by item, let's say, on how this 3.5 million impacted the NGPS. As you will see, there are three, the most prominent, let's say, of all is the hydrogen division. The shutdown of the hydrogen activities, which we had to take an impairment of assets for 1.5 million. We had to incur in some additional costs for shutting down some ongoing projects, and then finally inventories write-off for 0.5 million. So the 3.5 million, approximately 2 million, is related to hydrogen. And there is an obvious rationale behind this decision. I mean, ENGIE has a hydrogen business unit, and this would be a nonsense to invest in hydrogen in different ways at group level. So our strategic partnership with ENGIE would have never worked from this perspective, and therefore it has been a forced but natural choice to focus on the larger markets, which are Giga Storage, industrial solution, and e-mobility. Then finally we are on the market evolution analysis. We clearly see that in 2018, because 2019 data are not yet available, that 41% of our generation capacity worldwide is made with coal and oil, while residual 22% is gas, meaning that 63% of the total worldwide capacity is based on gas and coal. The message here is that if you compare that figure with the 2% solar or the 5% wind, we clearly see that the route for having a renewable world is very, very long. However, the picture in 2050 is totally different, because all projections and all analysis clearly show a world, the majority of which is powered by renewables. Essentially from 2% in 2018 to 23% in 2050 in terms of solar, moving from 5% to 24% wind, meaning that in 2050 essentially half of the generation capacity will be composed by renewables, which is a good message, obviously, but from a different perspective, intermittent power. Intermittent power means that we need to stabilize to convert that intermittent power into stable power source, and therefore transforming intermittent renewables into a stable power source available 24/7. That's the reason why in this slide we clearly see that the most important application of energy storage will be energy shifting, which is the light blue one. We also clearly see the growth in energy storage that we had from 2017 to 2020, but even more importantly, the growth that is projected from 2020 to 2025. We also see, if we look to the same picture from an addressable geography perspective, that the role of China, Japan, and Korea will decrease dramatically. China, Japan, and Korea have played a significant portion of the game in the last 3 years, while that share will be reduced dramatically because other countries, in particular the United States, will play as a leader in the energy storage field, which is a good news because China, Japan, and Korea were not addressable geographies for EPS before the acquisition and are not also today addressable geographies, at least from the huge Giga Storage deployments from the ENGIE perspective. Long story short, between 2018 and 2019, the energy storage market, so essentially starting from the acquisition of ENGIE by ENGIE, of ENGIE EPS, in 2019, the market grew by 142% compound annual growth rate, while it is expected to continue to grow in the 2020-2025 horizon, confirming the outlook, even taking into account the COVID-19 effect, because all figures are discounted by 31%, which is a conservative expectation of contraction for 2020 because of the coronavirus global recession that will follow up the pandemic spread. Reality is that this huge contraction does not change the bull outlook of the energy storage deployments, because we had in 2018 and 2019 more than 29 gigawatt hours tenders announced or awarded, excluding China, Japan and Korea. And the same figure in the 2020-2025 horizon is expected to achieve for Giga Storage only, so excluding commercial and industrial, excluding B2B, excluding residential, and excluding electrical vehicle, 252 gigawatt hours. That's the figure to memorize and to take into account. If we look to the deployments between 2015 and 2019, we clearly see the geographies in which storage has played a real game. We clearly see Japan, China, and Korea between 2 and 10 gigawatt hours in the last 4 or 5 years. We clearly see the dominance of the United States between 10 and 15 gigawatt hours. Also presence of Canada and Mexico, and Europe together for smaller deployments, South Africa, Morocco, and Middle East. The positive picture that we can take from these lines is the ENGIE presence. We clearly see that ENGIE is present and positioned in the most relevant markets. Obviously, those are the deployments of the last 4 years. As we saw a while ago, we had China, Korea, and Japan that are expected to reduce the stake, while the United States to increase up to almost 40%. So that's a tremendously positive message in terms of market outlook. So essentially, the market is growing fast, it's growing faster than expected, and is moving in the right direction, because the most aggressive growth is expected in the countries in which ENGIE is already positioned today. Then, in terms of positioning from a technological perspective, these slides outline the results of recent tenders, irrespective of the fact that those tenders turned into positive outcome for EPS, because as you know, our competitiveness is constantly tested by all business units of ENGIE. So we do not have an automatic or natural assignment to ENGIE EPS of a project, but rather we have a constant competitiveness check through internal real tenders launched by business units. So in order to get a contract and to participate as a partner also of ENGIE in tenders, we have to be competitive, and this is a natural choice. But even more importantly, we have to demonstrate in each single tender to be the most competitive player. And in this context, we have some real example of projects in France, in Pacific Islands, in US, where we have in all of them demonstrated in field to be more competitive than Asian, European, and US competitors. In all of them, EPS has been from 16 to 40% more competitive in terms of CapEx than any other competitor. Then in order to win a tender, we know that our competitiveness has to be coupled also with the ENGIE competitiveness. Then there are aspects of financial arrangements, cost of capital, and so on. So obviously, there is not being all the Giga Storage tenders tariff-based. So the role of the IPP is crucial. So the role of NG will be crucial. So there is no automatic, let me say, translation of our competitiveness into the tariff competitiveness, which eventually will turn into the tender award. However, this is the most important message. We were competitive, we have demonstrated, and we demonstrate in each single tender to be the most competitive player, and we will continue to do it thanks to our R&D and technological roadmap, which is based on one of the rationale behind our competitiveness is obviously also the industrial footprint we have in the northern Italian district that secures a competitiveness which is unparalleled in terms of not only in terms of manufacturing cost, but even more importantly in terms of engineering capabilities and optimization of synergies within the northern Italian district. Then, to complete the market outlook perspective, we have to take into account the role of electric vehicle. Electric vehicles that are essentially divided into BEV and plug-in hybrid, so full battery electric vehicle, or hybrid and therefore plug-in. And the world in terms of outlook has to be divided into three clear areas, which is United States, European Union, and China. As we said, we don't really look at the China perspective simply because it's not a country in which we are seriously positioned in terms of local presence, in terms of possibility to make investments, not even at the NG level. And therefore it's important to clearly look exclusively to the United States and European figures. However, just in US and EU, we are talking about, by 2030, approximately 50 million electrical vehicles. So I will explain in a while what this figure stands for. First of all, 50 million EVs between US and Europe. In US represent approximately 14% of the 2030 sales, so absolutely a reasonable number. We are not talking about a world which is dominated by EVs. We are talking about a world in which EV will play a considerable role and an important role, but ranging from 14% in 2030 of new annual sales in the United States and 31% in the European Union. So in European Union in 2030, 1 out of 3 vehicles will be either battery electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid. And these figures are absolutely important because we have to translate playing in the energy field, not in the automotive one. We have to translate such figures into energy demand. We clearly see in this slide the value of this energy. So let's focus, just as said, on European Union and United States. If we look to the 79 in 2030 to the 79 terawatt hours of electricity consumption devoted to charge electric vehicles in 2030, such as 79 terawatt hours in European Union and 53 in the United States, stands for 15 billion potential annual revenues in terms of electricity sale, and in European Union, and 10 billion in the US. So the question is where this electricity will be consumed. At home, at work, in the highways, in terms of high-speed charging, or in public station, in public wall box in cities. The answer is clearly represented in the energy demand chart that you see in the slide. We have two scenarios, more public-centered scenario and the home-centered scenario. But the common conclusion of this analysis is that home charge, so charging at home, your own electric vehicle, will play the most important role into the EV space. We clearly see today in the United States, 51% of recharges are made at home. In 2030, 44% are expected to be made at home. In the public center scenario, in the home center scenario, 64%. While in European Union, this difference is more aggressive, because we passed from 52% home-centered recharge in 2020 to 28% in 2030 in the public center scenario, and 40% in the home center scenario. Long story short, recharging at home will play, irrespective of the scenarios that we see, a considerable role in the energy system, attracting from approximately 30 to 64% of the revenues I just mentioned earlier. So the 15 billion annual revenues in the European Union and 10 billions in the United States. So here you see clearly why we have started to develop solutions in the e-mobility space, and we started with a wallbox which is focused on recharging electric vehicles at home. Then, to complete the picture, let's look for a while first what those figures represent. So we just said in 2030, 79 terawatt hours in the EU and 53 in the US. So what this stands for? In terms of electricity demand, we clearly see in the EV electricity demand chart that in 2020, EV's electricity demand out of the total renewable generation is 3.7%, and out of the total electricity generation is 0.4%. While if you look at 2030, to compare the data, 2% of the total electricity generation will be used to recharge electric vehicles, which is representing essentially 8% of the total renewable generation. So the main message here is that the increase in electricity demand by electric vehicle is covered by 10 times of the renewable generation, and is representing a negligible increase from the global energy demand perspective. Then a final message, which is the most important one. Let's look to the chart BEV capacity connected in EU in 2030. So in 2030, 1.3 terawatts are expected to be in terms of capacity installed. Okay? Then 70% of that capacity is representing 900 gigawatts. 900 gigawatts of potential power available for the grid, which is 95% of the time connected. Which means that if we take into account the number of gigawatts of batteries that will be 95% of the time connected to the grid in 2030, 70% is represented by electric vehicles. 900 gigawatts stands for 18 times the entire Italian power grid. So you can clearly understand why we are progressively and intensively booming also our e-mobility product line. Because we cannot deny that if 70% of power available to the European grid can be represented by electric vehicles, the ability for electric vehicles to be integrated into the grid in an efficient way and to represent the most important energy resource of the whole European grid in the next 5-10 years. I mean, this is the largest technological shift in the European grid, and generally speaking, in the history of the electrical grid that we have ever seen. So that's the reason why we started developing a smart solution to charge vehicles at home. And at the same time, we have launched, together with Fiat Chrysler Automobile, the largest vehicle-to-the-grid infrastructure in the world. 25 megawatts and 700 vehicles. The construction just started a few weeks ago. And with this project, we will demonstrate our ability as a system integrator to integrate in the most efficient way any electrical vehicle within the power grid and to optimize the ability of electrical vehicles to interact with the grid, being remunerated by the grid operator for the services that those vehicles that are connected 95% of the time can deliver to the grid in order to enable an even more aggressive penetration of renewables. Now I would like to show you a short video which describes the main steps and results achieved by our company during 2019, as well as the yearly results of 2020. And I will then leave the floor to Mr. Giuseppe Artizzu, our member of the board, executive director for global energy markets and development.
una giornata importante per NGPS, rappresenta per noi un significativo traguardo. Un traguardo della divisione mobility, ma un traguardo di NGPS in particolare. C'è troppa incertezza sull'evoluzione dell'emergenza sanitaria, sulla salute dei nostri cari, sul posto di lavoro, su quando capiranno le scuole soprattutto. E lo smart working in questo contesto non è una soluzione, ma un'impresa titanica per le famiglie. Da imprenditore sento la responsabilità per tutto questo e il dovere di dare una risposta e degli strumenti concreti, a partire dai miei collaboratori, a tutela non solo della loro sicurezza, ma anche del loro equilibrio familiare. E per questo motivo entro la prossima settimana lanceremo un rivoluzionario assetto organizzativo. Si chiamerà Family Working e sarà la rivoluzione del mondo del lavoro, che metterà al centro la famiglia.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In this part of the presentation, we provide an update on our market positioning in light of the 2020-2025 long-term strategic plan. Since mid-2019, as you know, our commercial effort has been organized along three product lines: the Industrial Solutions line, the Giga Storage line, and the e-mobility line. Our Industrial Solution product line stands in direct continuity with our historical decentralized energy solution business, whereby we build on our technology heritage to co-locate renewable energy resources and storage capacity by a specific user or pocket of load, in order to fulfill its specific affordability, reliability, and sustainability needs. The burgeoning growth in demand for utility-scale storage systems since 2018, particularly in the US, Australia, and India, driven by the rapid reduction in the cost of batteries, has brought us to gradually increase our development focus on large-scale modular solutions for extensive battery farms and solar plus storage systems. Last year, we articulated this effort in the Giga Storage product line. And it's still our unrelenting focus on market opportunities addressable by our core technology competencies that brought us to launch last year our e-mobility offering, where we use our power electronics and energy management competencies to market on one side groundbreaking solution for centralized fleet charging, and on the other side, special residential charging systems aimed at optimizing the charging experience within the boundaries of the existing home electrical systems. Now, while in industrial solution we have historically gone to market on our own, in the Giga Storage business we obviously go to market with Engie, whose balance sheet and reach makes it a natural leader in ownership and operation of utility-scale systems. In the mobility system, on the other hand, our go-to-market partner since last year has been the Fiat Chrysler Group. The articulation of our offering along three product lines has been accompanied by a rationalization of our technology offering in four technology families, all built on our core highest integration platform. I'm talking about the Store family, the Convert and Connect family, the Control family, and the Move family. The Store family is comprised of our containerized housing for battery capacity. These are the energy reservoirs of our systems, ensuring the optimal operating and safety environment for the battery chemistries that we select. The Convert and Connect family groups are our containerized offerings for converters and interconnection gear. This is the hardware interface between the store reservoir and the surrounding electrical systems. In practice, this is the tap regulating the flow of energy in and out of the batteries. The software intelligence governing the operation of all of our storage and electric vehicle charging system is instead in the Control family, that starts with our flagship Prophet energy management system. Last in order of time are our innovative electric vehicle charging system that comprise our Move technology family. Now, we are glad to say that the enhanced market focus outlined in last year's strategic plan has rapidly translated into outstanding results. A few weeks ago, we informed the market of Engie's selection as preferred bidder for one of the round 2 projects awarded by HECO, the Hawaiian electric utility. Within this flagship project, that will start operation in 2023, we will deliver to ENGIE a 240 MWh storage system to support a 60 MW solar farm that will support the power purchase agreement with ECO. Last fall, we announced instead the award of a similarly sized project, including a 300 MWh storage system in the island of Guam. This system is expected to enter into operation in 2022. The execution of the power purchase agreement, unfortunately, has been delayed by an appeal from another participant to the tender, and the hearings have been affected by the COVID situation. We now hope and expect the legal matter to clear by the end of the summer and accordingly to proceed to contractualization immediately thereafter. We expect the Giga Storage product line to represent our main growth engine in the short to medium term. Announcements such as Guam and Hawaii are unsurprisingly behind the growth in our pipeline to over 750 million euros, as we communicated to the market, and will feed our backlog as soon as contracting takes place. Since 2015, over 30 GWh of large storage programs have been announced globally. Of this, over 1/3 is in the US, another 20% in Australia, and just short of 10% in India and Europe each. Now, NGPS is positioning in all of those markets in order to capture a material share of this massive opportunity. The only significant markets that we are not actively pursuing are China, Japan, and Korea, due to long-standing technology barriers and regulatory standards that challenge foreign entrants. To give you just a flavor of things to come, in addition to Guam and Hawaii, which give visibility to over 100 million euro of revenues from 2021, we are shortlisted in tenders for 1 GWh storage capacity in the Persian Gulf region. We are positioning for the over 200 MWh tender to be launched by Terna, the Italian transmission system operator, for fast responding storage system later this year. We are taking part in tenders for over 300 MWh capacity in Australia and positioning in the gigawatt-hour size program for around-the-clock renewables energy supply in India. In addition, we are carefully monitoring the development on the 1.4 GWh storage program of Eskom, the South African vertical integrated utility, backed by the World Bank. Generally speaking, new opportunities are arising weekly in the Giga Storage market, and we are carefully selecting the ones better fitting our core competencies to maximize hit rate. On the other hand, the increasing cost competitiveness of our decentralized industrial solution offering is allowing us to target less challenging geographies than our historical frontier markets. Let me be clear, we are still developing and expanding our system in places like Somalia or the Comoros Island. But also, in 2019, we commissioned our 5 MWh microgrid storage system in New Caledonia and are now working on phase 2 of this project. We are building our first 4 MWh microgrid storage system in the US for an electric utility in California. We are retrofitting with storage conventional power plants in Southern Europe and are in advanced stage of discussion for industrial microgrids in continental Europe. Overall, we are tapping a 200 million euros plus opportunity pool that, while not as scalable as Giga Storage in terms of volumes, offer excellent marginality opportunities, as well as an invaluable testing ground for our innovative technology solutions and training ground for our world-class young engineers. Last, but certainly not least, our outstanding prospects in the e-mobility business. As you are aware, late last year we announced the first supply order by FCA for our revolutionary Easy Wallbox residential charging system. It is an order for up to 50,000 units that will be delivered by 2 FCA clients together with the electric vehicles, with obvious scalability potential. Furthermore, earlier this year, we announced the groundbreaking in Turin for the largest vehicle-to-grid project globally, which at regime will manage the aggregated charging of 700 electric vehicles. While optimizing the charging flows, this system will also transform the battery fleet in a major flexibility buffer from the grid, and therefore a revenue opportunity for fleet managers, contributing to the compelling economics of electric vehicles. With this announcement, we think NGPS demonstrated its potential as a leading contender also in the electric vehicle infrastructure space.
Mio padre è stato più un esempio che un maestro, però mi ha insegnato 3 cose. La passione per la montagna, la passione per l'industria e per la tecnologia, la passione per l'eccellenza e il sacrificio. Come atleta prima e come imprenditore poi. In fin dei conti oggi ho solo avuto la fortuna di coniugare in un solo momento tutte queste cose.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Then the second reason of our guidance withdrawal is obviously the COVID-19 outbreak. We have all seen, I don't want to enter into public data details. We saw the turmoil in the global markets, we saw the closure of external borders, supply chain disruption, travel bans. In March, when we announced our results, we already had a humanitarian tragedy of more than 200,000 reported cases in 150 countries. But the human cost of coronavirus has continued to mount, with almost 9 million cases confirmed globally and approximately 500,000 people known to have died. The World Health Organization has declared the outbreak a pandemic, and it has spread to more than 200 countries around the world. Global corporations and conglomerates are facing a serious risk of running out of cash. Helicopter money has been provided by governments and institutions, and a recession of a global proportion is in front of us. The outcome of this positioning and COVID-19 consequences has been declared because we analyzed as a management team several scenarios. Several scenarios in terms of revenues, in terms of growth, in terms of pipeline conversion. As you would imagine, in this dramatic moment, volatility of pipeline conversion into backlog is huge. Essentially, all the auction processes we were in were and are potentially at stake. Site visits and hearings were cancelled or postponed, in some cases to a date which is not yet defined. Travel bans for project development teams obviously are a big issue. And this translates into a bigger problem in terms of conversion of pipeline to backlog. And also for all our projects with B2B customers, we experienced and we noticed essentially a total CapEx and funding freeze, particularly in developing countries. Then second aspect, volatility on backlog conversion to revenues. More importantly, in light of our 2020 guidance, backlog volatility on backlog conversion to 2020 revenues, let me say. Additionally, you may imagine supply chain risk, supply chain disruption that we had, small medium enterprises in general, in Italy, but in particular in Europe, in this specific moment, have reduced or even interrupted operations for months. We have, as I was mentioning earlier, a rationed access to production plants. And to ensure safe working conditions, our offices and our production plants are still open, but limited to the essence to guarantee the business continuity. Then I already mentioned that our business continuity emergency plan was based on a firm hierarchy of values. First, the health of our employees, second, the civic responsibility, and thirdly, the preservation of the NGPS, economic and industrial value. And in light of all the above, let me say, we had, before announcing our 2019 results, a board meeting in which we analyzed those scenarios. And those scenarios that they don't give any visibility because of the volatility in terms of, again, pipeline conversion into backlog, and eventually backlog conversion to 2020 revenues. This is unsustainable in terms of financial information to the market, as you can imagine. And that's the reason why we decided to withdraw the guidance and to not commit to any alternative target for 2020, while, let me say, on our 2022 guidance, the 100 million revenue guidance, given the current pipeline, the more than 100 million of tenders won in the last 9 months, we never had a more solid visibility in our long-term performance, for sure. And one of the rationale behind this success that occurred in the middle of a global pandemic is also the new family working approach that we launched and that we described here in this slide. It sounds like a paradox, but recognizing to our employees a specific right to technology, flexibility, family, wellness, and parenthood increase the level of performance of our teams, productivity, and even more importantly, engagement. and the results are in front of our very eyes, let me say. Finally, we remain in any event positive, and even if in a dramatic situation with a 2020 that would certainly see for the first time a decrease in terms of top line and certainly not a growth, but confident on our strategic plan, because as we said, we have strong visibility on our 100 million guidance in 2022 in terms of revenues, and we feel on track from a market growth and positioning perspective also for our indicative ambition of 400 million in 2025 revenues. I mean, first of all, if you look at the pipeline today, if you look at the solidity of the pipeline, those figures are not just achievable, they are absolutely reasonable. So if you want to use a bottom-up approach looking to our fundamentals, that's a plan that is still valid, still is solid, and still is credible, more importantly. Then let me say, leaving aside for a while the COVID outbreak, that I want to assume, and I hope, and we all pray, this COVID outbreak tragedy will be temporary and limited in time. I mean, there is no reason to have any doubts on our ability to deliver this plan going forward. And even if we have, for our sense of responsibility, decided to withdraw the 2020 guidance, this does not affect the solidity of our fundamentals, the solidity of the pipeline, and then the solidity of our long-term strategic plan. Well, you might look to some figure here, it's pretty much clear. I mean, 400 million represents 4 gigawatt hours deployed. So to remind a couple of final figures, 100 million plus are already in the bag, with projects with expected COD, so commissioning between 2022 and 2023. So if we simply continue this trend, it is absolutely reasonable. And then if you want to compare to the market share, I mean, the new builds in the market is absolutely limited, because it represents 4 gigawatt hours, which stands for 2% of the market share, excluding China, Korea, and Japan. And even if we want to take the most conservative approach and say, okay, we were really unfortunate, we didn't position together with ENGIE in some tenders and some opportunities, and therefore I will assume that EPS and ENGIE will never position in those markets. Okay, so let's assume that we will just position in the markets in which we already positioned successfully, in essence, US, and where we already proven to be successful, and some other minor market. I mean, in this case, 4 gigawatt hours represent 4% of the market. And in the chart on the right, in the graph, in the right part of the slide, you see that the evolution of the market, I mean, 2015, 16, 17, I mean, small projects, okay, but then the market blew up in 2018. That was the year of the acquisition from the ENGIE group. And then in 2019, we already see the results in terms of positioning by ENGIE, which is present in 10% of the 16 gigawatt hours, which has been shortlisted, let's say, but 10% of gigawatt hours announced in the market in 2019. So we all would have expected a more aggressive positioning of ENGIE in storage segment since the beginning, and certainly we felt disappointed for the 2019 results. But we now have a clear roadmap, a solid organization, and a competitive technology, competitive modern era, with a clear visibility on our 2022 targets and confidence on the 2025 ambitions. 2019 has been a year of transition, but the partnership with ENGIE in the last 9 months made a step change. We have to acknowledge that. I mean, 100 million plus tender wons, meaning that even in a strongly decentralized and complex organization like ENGIE, we can make things happen. And this is thanks to the fact that we now are under the global business line renewables, led by our chairman, Thierry Calfon, and under the leadership of Gwenelle, executive vice president in charge also of the ENGIE Solar and ENGIE EPS, but even more importantly, in charge of the business unit in North America. And this is not a coincidence that Guam and Hawaii are in North America. The recent success of Guam and Hawaii is thanks to them, coupled in a synergic way with the excellence of our teams and the excellence of our technology. It is just now a matter of replicating such success in other geographies with other business units, with their support. But we have time, and our organization is today, let me say, more solid than ever. I suggest now to move on the governance section of this presentation. This year, the terms of office of three directors, Mr. Massimo Prezzo Tramonti, Mrs. Silla Joaquin Monfils, and Mrs. Cristina Tomasini, are coming to the end, and a director, Mr. Jean Rapp, has informed the company of his decision to resign from his duties. The board of directors has decided to not renew the board mandates of Mrs. Silla Joaquin Monfils and Mrs. Cristina Tomasini. I would like to thank very warmly for their contribution to the work of the board during last year. The directors decided then to propose the renewal for 3 years of the board mandate of Mr. Massimo Prezzo Tramonti as independent member of the board. The board of directors proposes the appointment of 3 board members: Ms. Carly Wischer as NG representative, Mrs. Mirai Van Steen as NG representative, and Mr. Luigi Michi as independent director. Mr. Luigi Michi has a significant over 30 years experience in the energy industry, where he has been playing different roles since 1985. Luigi, who is currently working as a consultant, is fully fledged expert of the energy markets and complex electrical systems, being intensively involved in the current energy transition and profoundly aware of the challenges we all have in front of us. Over the last and technology-wise exciting years, he has had the chance of coming across our company, at that time EPS, Electric Power System, widely recognized as one of the most prominent and cutting-edge companies at that time, and a concrete successful player of the energy transition. Luigi had been working closely as a head of strategy, development and system operation in Terna, the Italian transmission system operator, being particularly in the largest grid operator in Europe, being particularly responsible for regulatory affairs, grid planning, market analysis, and dispatching activities. The ratification of the co-optation of Mrs. Alice Tagger is also proposed for your vote. Following this meeting and subject to the adoption of the resolutions, your board of directors will be composed by these board members. The board of directors will be then composed of 10 members, 5 different nationalities, 3 independent directors, 4 women, 1 executive director, and 5 directors representing the majority shareholder of the company. This composition reflects the diversity and complementarity of profiles and experiences, skills, and cultures sought by the board. Concerning the committee assisting the board of directors, NGAPS has 2 specialized committees: the Audit Committee and the Remuneration and Nomination Committee. During 2019, the Audit Committee has worked on the financial accounts of the company, reviewing the half-year results and the full-year results, while the Remuneration and Nomination Committee, in its 3 meeting during 2019, has analyzed the CEO compensation package, reviewed the say-on-pay report, and worked on proposal for attendance fees and their allocation. There is also an ad hoc committee which assists the board of directors, the Independence Committee. This committee has been established in September 2019 with the purpose to review significant agreements between the NGAPS and the NG Group entities. We'll pass now to the presentation of the new statutory auditor. The Board of Directors, acknowledging the expiration of the mandate of BDO, Peris, Audit and Advisory as principal statutory auditor of the company, has decided to appoint Deloitte et Associés as new principal statutory auditor of the company for a term of 6 years, expiring at the end of the shareholders meeting to be held in 2026. This information is subject to your approval. I will now present the NGPS Investor Relations with its shareholders and investors during 2019. In 2019, NGPS had more than 100 investor and analyst calls and meetings in France, Italy and UK. As evidence of the extreme attention that the company puts on investor relations, in 2019 NGPS met 57 investor and financial players, and the management had continuous communication with almost 13 of them. We took also part to 2 investor conferences, the Société Générale Nice conference in May and the UBS Global Renewable Conference in September, and one roadshow with more than 270 investors attending in total. Let me present now the resolution pertaining to the remuneration of corporate officer. Prior to the presentation of the details of my compensation as Chief Executive Officer of the company, I have to remind you that following the rules of the Backlog and in accordance with Ordonnance numéro 2019-1234 dated 27 November 2019 on the compensation of corporate officers of listed companies, supplemented by Decree number 2019-1235 dated 27 November 2019, transposing the Shareholders' Right Directive, you will be invited to vote the compensation policy applicable to the corporate officers and the Chairman of the Board of Directors, the CEO, and members of the Board of Directors for the 2020 financial year, which are detailed in paragraph 13.1 of the 2019 Universal Registration Document. Also, in addition to the individual ex post vote on the remuneration granted to the Chairman of the Board and to the CEO individually, you will also be invited to vote on the overall compensation and benefits of all kind granted for the financial year 2019, overall ex post vote to the corporate officers. The details of this compensation are laid out in paragraph 13.2.1 of the 2019 Universal Registration Document. Let me now present the compensation of the Chief Executive Officer. My compensation is essentially made by 2 components: short-term cash-based and a medium-long-term compensation based on the so-called stock appreciation rights, SARs. Parts of them are indexed to the stock price, others purely based on performance. For the short-term component of my compensation in 2019, I received a total compensation equal to 242,000 euros, composed of 185 fixed salary, 25.3 benefits, and essentially a company car and health insurance, and approximately 32,000 variable compensation, which represents approximately 50% of the maximum bonus, which is 35% I can receive. As you know, my variable compensation is 50% based on quantitative targets and 50% on qualitative targets. The Board of Directors determined in 2019 that I completely achieved all qualitative targets, but they considered not met any of the quantitative targets, therefore 0%. As you see in the slide, the Board of Directors determined also an increase in my fixed salary by 5%. On the medium-long-term component of my compensation, the analysis is twofold. On the one hand, we have the transformed SARs. In essence, stock options I vested in 2016 and that should have been exercised at closing in March 2018 upon NG acquisition. However, as you will remember, I decided to postpone the exercise of such stock options in order to outline my commitment to continue the integration of EPS within the NG group, and more importantly, let me say, for the greatest interest of the company, and therefore of NG EPS. As you see, the transform star that are still to be exercised are now limited in size. This is the reason why, in parallel, also a new plan for additional SARs was approved in 2018, with vesting through 2021. Such additional SARs were not indexed to stock price, but rather exclusively to performance. Performance that was based on the 2020 strategic plan we launched back in 2017, and as you can see in our accounts and in the 2019 corporate governance report, the fair value of this management incentive plan for me is approximately 1.3 million euro. However, this might be misleading, as fair value according to international accounting standards is calculated at the time of allocation, which was in 2018. While reality is not really in line with the accounting principles we have to follow. Therefore, let me then clarify the situation, as I received several questions by different investors during our intense investor relations activity with more than 100 investors meetings and calls, as I just outlined in the preceding section of the presentation. Then, last year we announced the new long-term strategic plan, giving up the EPC business model for Giga Storage for the greatest industrial interest of the company in the long term, let me say. This was a natural choice, as you will remember. I mean, as all projects in the Giga Storage product line, being utility scale storage or large scale solar plus storage projects, are sort of jumbo projects compared to our balance sheet. And for all those projects and tenders, we are constantly backed and supported by NG on a project by project basis, obviously, in terms of performance guarantees, in terms of EPC guarantees. Then, with an EPC play in Giga Storage, even if potentially justified by the fact that the system integrator role and the storage component of a solar plus storage project are the most important ones, in reality, the level of guarantees and financial support we should have required to NG would have been unsustainable from the group, for the group with an EPC play at the EPS level. Therefore, it was opted for a more industrially oriented and less risky tech play for Giga Storage product line, leaving to other group companies, typically NG Solar or other players, the EPC play in Giga Storage. However, this choice had a short-term consequence in terms of slower growth, which turned into the backlog reduction, a revised 2020 guidance, and the postponement of the 100 million guidance to 2022. In other terms, the original performance targets under the additional SAR plan turned into being essentially unachievable. Well, since June last year, unfortunately, the original additional SAR plan targets has not been updated, and therefore the consequence for all beneficiaries of this plan, not just myself, but also the other components of the management team, is that the value of this plan, at least for the performance portion, is today close to zero, and not 1.3 million. And in my specific case, my additional SAR plan was 100% based on performance of such targets. In any case, because of the say on pay regime for CEOs of listed companies in France, any change of such targets should have been proposed to you, shareholders, by the board and voted ex ante by all shareholders during the annual general meeting. This has not been the case, but in any event, my mandate as board member and CEO will expire with the approval of the 2020 accounts, and then the board will have now the opportunity to address the topic in the context of the potential renewal of my mandate. date. I propose now to pass to the presentation of the Auditor's Spatial reports.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Au nom des commissaires aux comptes, BDO Paris et RBB Business Advisors, je me propose de vous rendre compte de notre mission sur les comptes de l'exercice clos le 31 décembre 2019. Nos rapports sur les comptes annuels, sur les comptes consolidés et sur les conventions réglementées ont été tenus à votre disposition par la société et figurent dans le document d'enregistrement universel 2019. Je vous propose de vous en résumer les termes. Tout d'abord, en ce qui concerne notre rapport sur les comptes consolidés IFRS du groupe NJEPS, rapport qui figure pages 274 à 280 du document d'enregistrement universel, nous avons certifié ces comptes sans réserve et avec une observation sur l'application de nouveaux principes comptables IFRS 16 et IFRIC 23. En ce qui concerne notre rapport sur les comptes statutaires d'NJEPS, rapport qui figure pages 361 à 366 du document d'enregistrement universel, nous avons certifié ces comptes sans réserve ni observation. Par ailleurs, nous avons émis notre rapport sur les conventions réglementées, rapport qui figure pages 389 à 392 du document d'enregistrement universel. Nous avons été visés de 2 conventions et engagements conclus au cours de l'exercice écoulé qui sont soumis à l'approbation de la présente Assemblée générale. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Many thanks. We are now reaching the end of the presentation and we will then move into the Q&A section. Il est précisé que les actionnaires ont eu la possibilité de remettre des questions écrites préalablement à l'Assemblée dans des conditions légales et réglementaires. Aucune question n'a été remise. Nous passons donc directement au vote des résolutions.
Mesdames et Messieurs, chers actionnaires, nous allons vous présenter les résultats des votes pour chacune des résolutions. Étant donné que ces résolutions font partie des documents qui vous ont été mis à disposition sur le site internet de la société, nous dispenserons de la lecture intégrale de ces derniers. Nous nous limiterons donc au résumé qui sera affiché à l'écran. Nous pouvons passer au résultat des votes de résolution.
Tout d'abord, les résolutions à titre ordinaire. Première résolution, approbation des comptes sociaux de l'exercice 2019. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La première résolution est approuvée. Deuxième résolution, approbation des comptes consolidés 2019. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La deuxième résolution est approuvée. Troisième résolution, affectation du résultat de l'exercice 2019. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et aussi la troisième résolution est approuvée. Quatrième résolution, approbation des conventions réglementées conclues au cours de l'exercice 2019. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La quatrième résolution est approuvée. Cinquième résolution, approbation des dépenses et charges spéciaux. La présente résolution a pour objet de constater que la société n'a pas engagé les dépenses ou charges visées à l'article 39 alinéa 4 du Code général des impôts au cours de 2019. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et aussi la cinquième résolution est approuvée. Sixième résolution, fixation des jetons de présence alloués pour l'exercice 2019. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et aussi la 6e résolution est approuvée. 7e résolution, ratification de la cooptation de Madame Alice Tagger. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La 7e résolution est approuvée. 8e résolution, non-renouvellement du mandat d'administrateur de Madame Cristina Tomasini. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 8e résolution est approuvée. 9e résolution, non-renouvellement du mandat d'administrateur de Madame Silla Coami Monfils. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 9e résolution est approuvée. 10e résolution, renouvellement du mandat d'administrateur de M. Massimo Prezzo Tramonti. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 10e résolution est approuvée. 11e résolution, ratification de la démission de M. Jean Rapp. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 11e résolution est approuvée. 12e résolution, nomination d'un nouvel administrateur, Madame Carly Wishart. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La 12e résolution est approuvée. 13e résolution, nomination d'un nouvel administrateur, Madame Mireille Van Steyen. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et voilà, la 13e résolution est approuvée. 14e résolution, nomination d'un nouvel administrateur, Monsieur Luigi Micchi. Le résultat s'affiche sur votre écran. Et la 14e résolution est approuvée. 15e résolution, approbation de la politique de rémunération des mandataires sociaux au titre de l'exercice 2020. Les détails sont présentés dans les rapports sur le gouvernement d'entreprise 2019, joint au rapport du conseil d'administration pour la présentation de l'Assemblée générale. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 15e résolution est approuvée. 16e résolution, approbation de la politique de rémunération du président du conseil d'administration au titre de l'exercice 2020, dont les détails sont présentés dans le rapport sur le gouvernement d'entreprise 2019, joint au rapport du conseil d'administration pour la présente Assemblée générale. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 16e résolution est approuvée. 17e résolution, approbation de la politique de rémunération du directeur général au titre de l'exercice 2020. Les détails sont présentés dans le rapport sur le gouvernement d'entreprise 2019, joint au rapport du conseil d'administration pour la présente Assemblée générale. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 17e résolution est approuvée. 18e résolution, approbation de la politique de rémunération des administrateurs au titre de l'exercice 2020, dont les détails sont présentés dans le rapport sur le gouvernement d'entreprise 2019, joint au rapport du conseil d'administration pour la présente Assemblée générale. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 18e résolution est approuvée. 19e résolution, approbation de la rémunération totale et des avantages de toute nature versés ou attribués aux mandataires sociaux au titre de l'exercice 2019, dont les détails sont présentés dans le rapport sur le gouvernement d'entreprise 2019, joint au rapport du conseil d'administration pour la présente Assemblée générale. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 19e résolution est approuvée. 20e résolution, approbation de la rémunération totale et des avantages de toute nature versés ou attribués au directeur général au titre de l'exercice 2019. Les détails sont présentés dans le rapport sur le gouvernement d'entreprise 2019, joint au rapport du conseil d'administration pour la présente Assemblée générale. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 20e résolution est approuvée. 21e résolution, nomination de Deloitte est associé en tant que commissaire aux comptes titulaire. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 21e résolution est approuvée. 22e résolution, ratification du transfert du siège social. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La 22e résolution est approuvée. 23e résolution, autorisation à donner au conseil d'administration en vue de l'achat par la société de ses propres actions. Cette résolution a pour objet d'autoriser le conseil d'administration pour une période de 18 mois à opérer sur les actions de la société dans la limite de 10% du capital social dans le cadre des objectifs autorisés. Le prix maximum d'achat pour les actions est fixé à 15 € et le montant global affecté à ces rachats ne pourra dépasser 1 500 000 €. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. La 23e résolution est approuvée. Nous passons maintenant aux résolutions relevant de la compétence de l'Assemblée générale extraordinaire. 24e résolution. Autorisation à donner au conseil d'administration en vue de réduire le capital social par voie d'annulation d'actions de la société dans le cadre de l'autorisation de rachat à ses propres actions. Cette résolution a pour objet d'autoriser le conseil d'administration pour une période de 18 mois à réduire le capital social en une ou plusieurs fois dans la limite de 10% du capital social dans une période de 24 mois par voie d'annulation de toute ou partie des actions ordinaires que la société détient ou pourra détenir par suite des rachats réalisés dans le cadre des articles L 225, 209 et suivants du Code de commerce. Le résultat s'affiche sur votre écran. La 24e résolution est approuvée. 25e résolution, délégation des pouvoirs nécessaires en vue des formalités. Les résultats s'affichent sur votre écran. Et la 25e résolution est approuvée. Je vous remercie pour votre attention. Mesdames et messieurs, chers actionnaires, l'ordre du jour étant épuisé, je déclare clos les travaux de notre Assemblée générale mixte. Merci de votre présence à distance, de votre fidélité et de votre soutien dans ces circonstances exceptionnelles. Je vous rappelle qu'une réunion d'investisseurs interactive par webcast avec une session interactive de Q&A aura lieu après cette assemblée à 11h30. Je vous invite à visiter la page de notre site internet dédié pour obtenir des informations relatives à la connexion. Très bonne fin de journée.